I'd like to call to order the City Council special regular meeting of Tuesday, September 10th, 2024. Could we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Altman? Here. Councilmember Meadows?
Here.
Councilmember Watson?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Singh?
Here.
Mayor Brookover?
Here. Could we have a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved.
Moved by Meadows, seconded by Altman. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion passes unanimously. Communications from the audience. Dr. Edsel.
Good evening. I want to thank the City Manager Bellman for his agenda report item regarding the LEPOC request to codify prohibition of pretextual stops. I believe there's enough information in this report alone to support such an ordinance, and I want to thank the Council for taking the time to consider this request. Hopefully we'll come to the same conclusion as we did when we passed our motion in January of this year. Before I get to the agenda report, I want to share a little more information. Over the course of 13 years, Philando Castile was pulled over by police in Minneapolis-St. Paul at least 49 times, mostly for low-level infractions. In 2016, he was pulled over for a cracked taillight. Within 40 seconds, he was murdered by the police officer in front of his girlfriend and toddler. Tyree Nichols was stopped for suspicion of speeding, though video footage would dispute this claim, before he was beaten to death by Memphis police officers. Patrick Loyola was stopped for mismatched license plates before being shot in the back of the head by a police officer who stopped him in Grand Rapids. Here in East Lansing, Mr. Loggins was stopped in 2019 for not using his turn signal. The stop turned into a search of his vehicle, and eventually the NELPD officer smashed his face into the pavement, rubbing it back and forth, causing serious facial abrasions. These scenarios have been repeated countless times here and across the country. Interest in changing the way East Lansing community members are policed started before the incident with Mr. Loggins. However, his assault and shortly thereafter a similar assault upon Mr. Gastito outside the 7-Eleven for filming his friend getting arrested led to an increase in community awareness and involvement in police reform. Multiple council members, including Council members Dana Watson, Mark Meadows, Ron Bacon, Lisa Babcock, Noel Garcia, Ruth Byer, 3 police chiefs, Murphy, Sparks, and Johnson, as well as community members Chuck Grisby, Nell Kumanich, Karen Honey, Chris Root, Eric Williams, Jeff Ray, Liz Miller, Heidi Thornley. The entire committee that created the Police Oversight Commission, as well as many others, have invested time into looking at current ordinances and practices. Out of these discussions, significant changes were made to East Lansing's disturbing the peace laws and ELPD policies to reflect the desires of the community. One significant change to police policy was the language that the Police Chief Johnson added to policies 300-26 and 300-35 in March of 2022. The language, quote, ELPD has a reduced interest in non-public safety violations due to their regulatory nature and lack of relation to true public safety is significant. It recognizes that pretextual stops are regulatory and not tied to public safety. Many police departments claim that these low-level stops help to root out crime. However, this claim is not supported by data. A Vera Institute study of 103,800 traffic stops in LA, San Diego, Fresno, Long Beach, and Oakland found a 0.5% incident in confiscating contraband. The Policing Project, in partnership with the Stanford Computational Policy Lab, performed a thorough cost-benefit analysis assessment of the use of traffic stops to address crime. This 2018 report concluded that traffic stops are not an effective strategy for reducing crime. Not only do they not root out crime, but they place civilians and officers in unnecessary danger. The New York Times found that nationally between 2017 and 2021, police murdered 400 drivers or passengers during traffic stops who were both unarmed and not being stopped for violent crime. Just about every database was impacted by COVID, and ELPD is no different. However, based on the data provided in the agenda report, it is clear the policy implemented by Chief Johnson had an impact on how often civilians were stopped for secondary offenses. We saw a significant drop in citations issued. At the same time, we saw a national decrease in overall crime. A deeper dive into the ELPD data has been difficult at best. Many of the issues are listed in the CNA report, but one is obvious in the agenda report. When officers report a civilian's race as unknown, the ability to utilize data to determine racial disparities becomes nearly impossible. This was intentional when race was removed from driver's license and continues when officers list race as unknown far more often than known. Still, if we assume the unknowns mirror the known data, which likely underrepresents black people, there is a significant overrepresentation of black drivers in the data from pretextual stops at 32% versus 61% for white drivers. These disparities are a national problem. The Stanford Open Policing Project found in a database of 100 million traffic stops across the U.S., black drivers were about 20% more likely to be stopped, for all reasons, than white drivers relative to their share of residential population. The study found that one stop, black drivers were searched 1.5 to 2 times as often as white drivers, while they were less likely to be carrying drugs, guns, or other illegal contraband compared to their white peers. This is despite laws that forbid racial profiling. When measuring the effect that policing has had on public safety, we must include the social costs of policing. While police like to believe that police encounters are innocuous, they can make communities less healthy and prosperous. These social costs include damage to the health of individuals and communities, suppression of educational achievement, harm to economic security, and reductions in civic participation and community engagement, even when there's not an arrest or citation. Ordinance 533 directs the work of the East Lansing Independent Police Oversight Commission and states as its purpose to increase accountability and strengthen conditions leading to trust in the police department. Pretextual stops harm this trust, particularly when poor and black community members are targeted. Since May 29th, when Interim Chief Pride removed the language that called for reduced interest in secondary stops, LAPOC has received 3 use of force monthly reports. Unlike the 2.5 years before, in these 3 reports, there were 2 separate incidences of force used on community members who were stopped for pretextual reasons, no insurance and registration violations. These represent 6.7 of all use of force incidents during this period. Both vehicles were stopped where the driver were driven by black drivers and black passengers. Neither stop resulted in confiscation of any contraband, but did lead to multiple people being handcuffed, one individual being charged with obstruction, and another had their car impounded. These are actions that harm individuals and communities and cause lack of trust of the police department. Furthermore, am I out of time?
Yes.
Okay. I'll send you the rest of that.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. Najim Salman.
Hello. I'm just trying to get the permission from the city of East Lansing to build and call it in-law suite. And this idea came out to me when my son went to Texas last year, and he's getting married, and he graduated from MSU University 2 years ago, and he turned four jobs out of state, and he wanted to stay with us. Me and my wife getting older, so we were looking into keeping him with us in the house, but he decided him and his wife, he's going to get married soon, to stay in an apartment. And we thought about it, rather than he stay in an apartment, which was really expensive, from $1,500 and up. We said maybe we build an in-law suite, which is they do that in Texas. That's what we took some pictures and sent it to me. Most of the houses, they do that in there. So he said, Dad, this is something we could build up in the front of the house. Of course, we follow the code, of course, of East Lansing. And just of a way of keeping him with us. And also to save some money for him. And instead of paying that $1,500 plus minus the rent, he doesn't have to pay that. And also, if we want to buy a piece of lot to build him the in-laws suite, at least going to be between $60,000 to $80,000 a lot here in East Lansing, which is the price almost to build up in-law suite. It's not going to be that big, which is usually average about 400, 500 to 600, usually 500 square footage. So I'm trying to see if the city of Lansing, East Lansing, give us a permission to do that. And this is another way to cut the prices of the properties. It might help. It might help to reduce the price of properties.
Okay, well, there is a process for that, and City Manager Bellman will contact you tomorrow and get you to the right people to discuss the issue.
Thank you.
City staff. Thanks for coming. Mr. Secor?
I misunderstood the protocols. My comments relate to one of the agenda items.
You can go ahead and talk now.
You should speak now.
Sure, yeah.
I am Jim Secor, S-E-C-O-R, 605 Butterfield Drive. My concern is with the extreme difficulty, and I can document it, difficulty I have had in addressing the issue of my basement being used to take the city's backflow of sewage. It's happened 3 times. So I have lots and lots of research and lots of names of people I've consulted, but the essence of what I heard from the city representatives was, you've got to put in a backflow interrupter, and that's fine, that's what I want to do. But oh, by the way, you have to have a project where you put in a 5x5 sump in the basement, and the reason that you have to do that is because your drainage perimeter has this trickle of fresh water, a trickle, and I have a video of it, a trickle that must be diverted. And so I said, okay, well, who do I do that? Once I just call a contractor. Everybody was evasive and trying to obfuscate and trying to get out. There's something up, because the city representatives who have come to me are restricted by protocols, in all respect, from you people. They won't give me straight answers, much less put it in writing. So I'm guessing after 2, these people had to come and say, what are we doing here? Well, you got to put in a crock, and I got to go now. What is a crock? What does all that mean? And say, well, I'll just call some contractors. Well, I have got a list of 6 or 8 contractors, 3 of whom out and out said, we don't do jobs like that, not in East Lansing. Okay, so I finally, and this is 6 weeks consuming this, trying to find contractors. No, why don't you go, good old Harry so-and-so, on and on and on. So then finally, I did get a contractor to give me a bid for in excess of $10,000. $10,000 in excess of that. And so the federal money that you folks have for putting in a backflow interrupter is maxed out at $3,000. So I was allowed to flounder around with this, and I wanted an answer. Once we put in this $10,000 operation, most of which is going to be paid for out of my pocket, and we're redirecting this trickle of fresh water from my perimeter drains, how far will it be to put it into the storm sewer? I'll get back to you on that. 2 weeks went by, neither of them did. And the answer they knew all very well, I'm sure by now. There is no storm sewer. It's all being combined in the same drain, and I go through $10,000 to redirect my trickle, and it's going to the same place. This does not make sense. And for you to put the city employees in the position of having to defend this perfect nonsense, everybody, nobody's going to give me a straight answer. Nobody, I got to go now. I'm sorry, out of time. And some of the people who did come and look at it, the contractors said, "Yeah, man, you got a problem. I got to go now. See you. Good luck." Over and over and over. I'm not an engineer. I don't care to be an engineer. But it appears to me, and I'm a little bit familiar with how zoning regulations usually work. If you have a non-conforming building and it has to be repaired, and it must be brought up to code. I get that. I'm familiar with that concept. But in this case, I am required to put in this elaborate, expensive redirection of my trickle because someday we're going to put in a storm sewer. I urge you, you need to pass an exemption for people whose property is not served by a split system. And that's a lot of East Lansing. But to require us to satisfy this code so that if we ever build a storm sewer, we'll be able to connect your trickle. That's nonsensical. But nobody will give me straight answers. Certainly nobody will put anything in writing, and they all look like they're scared to death there's going to be another lawsuit and another argument. So That's the essence of my message. I put a lot of this in writing, and I'll be happy to copy you if you'd like to see it. But I have written, and I copied Mark.
Mark.
This is very frustrating.
Mark who?
Mark Meadows.
Oh, okay. So I appreciate your comments. A lot of people in East Lansing have similar feelings, but now I'm going to give you a straight answer.
I beg your
I'm going to give you a straight answer.
Yes.
See this little man sitting right down here?
Yes.
That's the city manager.
He's
Okay?
leaving now.
He gets paid to solve or at least communicate some of these problems.
All right.
So would you please, if you have email traffic
Yes.
or anything else you have, would you please get it to Mr. Bellman? He'll follow up as quickly as he can. A lot of people make demands on him, and he'll look into your complaints about some of our employees and what may or may not have happened. Hang on, please, let me talk now, please. And so if you'll get with him, let's see if we can do some problem solving here. I'm not going to comment one way or the other on your understanding or, of all the different things you covered, okay? But let's see if we can do some problem solving here to see if we can get you some assistance somehow.
Okay.
Does that sound fair?
Yep.
Okay, thanks for coming, appreciate it. Ms. Danhoff.
Before we do this, I think Jim knows that staff from DPW is making an appointment with him to already go to his house and help him deal with this. And he's had communications with DPW on this a little previously, but I think they're committed to making you happy. So let's put that on the record, okay?
Ms. Danhoff.
Hi, I'm Linda Danhoff. I live at 1812 Burwood Circle. That's a condominium complex right off of Bircham near the baseball field. I was on the board there on the condominium complex for over 20 years, and I was president of the board for 12 years. I only recently left the board. I was asked at that time to finish up a large multi-year project that we have in our complex, and that was to increase our pumps, the pump stormwater out of our complex and into the drain line onto Bircham. It was a multi-year project of which I spent many hours with members of the East Lansing Water Department. They know us by name. We have put in an over $50,000 project that includes upgrading our Generac, upgrading our pumps, wetland studies, as well as full engineering on the project as well. I'm glad to see you had the open house. I spent a good amount of time with the engineer there, and I hope to see some answers to the stormwater problem really between Moreland and Park Lake Road, which includes area near the solar park, as well as Bircham Hills Retirement Center. We had a lot of standing water again with this last rain. I was actually caught in my car in that rain, and there were multiple large puddles between those two areas with standing water. I also see on your agenda, and I just want to comment briefly about the solar park. While I was president of Woodstone Village, the solar park on the corner of Bircham and Park Lake went in, and this butts up to our property, our Woodstone property, and we had numerous meetings, met with City Council, and we met many times with the Michigan Solar Park people. Can't remember exactly the name of that committee, but we met at their facility a number of times, and we walked the property a number of times. I just want to say that I still have in my possession pictures of the fencing that was supposed to go up, which is not the fencing that is up, about the landscaping that was supposed to be done to try to soften our view of the solar park, which was not done right. Just numerous items. We were able to get our 12-inch berm, and that allows some of the water, because as you may or may not know, all those solar panels had to be placed on cement blocks because they could not be put into the ground, because that's the old trash dump for the city. So we were very concerned about more runoff water coming from that property onto our property. The berm is there, and there is a holding pool to the south. but we were promised by the board that that would be maintained by the city to try to keep water from going to our property. It's hard to tell if that helps or not. We've been having numerous floods, just like a lot of other places in East Lansing. So I looked forward to hearing hopefully what some of the answers might be tonight. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Ms. Haney?
Hello, I'm Karen Honey, 963 Lilac Avenue, East Lansing. I am the vice chair of the Human Rights Commission. Hold on, I just lost my screen. And I'm here to speak on agenda item 7.3, pretextual stops, which Dr. Etzel was talking about. Last night, we met as a Human Rights Commission and voted to support the LEPAC's resolution, which I'm going to read. The East Lansing Human Rights Commission unanimously supports the motion passed by the East Lansing Independent Police Oversight Commission, which states, LEPAC asks the City Council of East Lansing, in concert with the city manager, the police chief, and the city attorney, to codify the following and place into current law regarding traffic stops where deemed appropriate. No law enforcement officer employed by the East Lansing Police Department shall stop or detain an operator or occupant of a motor vehicle based on race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, socioeconomic status, age, cultural group, or disability. A law enforcement officer employed by the City of East Lansing Police Department shall not stop or detain the operator of an occupant of a motor vehicle based solely on the following offense: cracked or chipped windshield, loud exhaust, tinted windows, object hanging from the rearview mirror, cracked, broken, or burned out tail lamp where at least one tail lamp remains functional and properly illuminated, registration plate lighting violations, registration plate violations regarding the plate height or attachment, location of registration sticker, peeling registration sticker, location of temporary or paper registration plate so long as it remains visible from the rear of the vehicle, defective equipment, other non-safety violations, and registration tags expired less than 30 days. As a commission charged with upholding the rights of protected classes in our community and surrounding communities, we recognize that people from protected classes are more likely to be stopped and ticketed and potentially harmed, as in all the examples Dr. Etzel gave, for traffic offenses which pose no threat to the public and may very well face a more significant financial burden as a result of being ticketed for such offenses. We believe that codifying the policy, which had been adopted by the ELPD in 2022 and then was subsequently in May of this year taken out of the policy, there was an immediate result of a significant decrease in such pretextual stops in 2022. We believe that codifying this language will go a long way towards improving the relationship between law enforcement and the greater community and increase the sense of trust and belonging from members of minoritized communities, thus improving the well-being of the greater East Lansing community. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Anybody in the queue?
There are no callers in the queue.
Okay, let's move ahead, please. Then communication from council members, starting to my left. Dr. Altman.
Nothing tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Meadows.
Nothing this evening.
Ms. Watson.
No, nothing, thank you.
Ms. Singh.
I do have two quick items, one of which is for those who are not aware, COVID boosters are available. So there's been a surge in cases across the country, so I would urge you to take advantage of those. And I may save, because I'm looking for the text from a constituent to share regarding the open houses, but I'm going to have to reserve that to another time. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing for tonight. Mr. City Manager.
Just one item. City Charter Review Committee is meeting this Thursday, 6:30 here at Hannah. There is an email that's been established if residents of East Lansing wants to communicate with the review committee on the city charter and proposed changes. It's elcharter@cityofeastlansing.com.
Let me just verify. That's this Thursday? I thought their meeting was Wednesday. Mr. Meadows, do you recall?
Thursday.
Thursday, and where is it again, please?
Here, upstairs in
Okay.
235.
Because the Historic District, I think, is in this room on Thursday night. Okay. Business agenda, item 6.1. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Meadows moves that we approve a resolution recognizing the Set Seg Educational Foundation as a nonprofit organization located in the city of East Lansing for the purpose of obtaining a charitable gaming license from the Michigan Lottery Bureau. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Watson. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion passes unanimously. Discussion items. Item 7.1, discussion of June, July 2024 post-storm report prepared by HDR Michigan, Inc.
Good evening, Cliff Walls, Environmental Sustainability, DPW. I'll give Ernie West from HDR a second to get his screen ready. But yes, this is the discussion about the post-storm analysis that HDR performed. They're going to give a presentation. There'll be time for questions. They have other staff available for questions also online as panelists. After that, Ron is going to detail some of the wet weather improvements that the city has made over the past 10, 15 years or so. And we have Stephen from engineering and Josh Moore from the WRF, our WRF superintendent, here for any other questions. So we're prepared for whatever you may have. But I just do want to acknowledge before I turn things over to HDR, the Herculean lift that this was for them to be able to put this together in a short timeline. We really are appreciative of the quality report that came out of that effort. And it stands without the context of being such a quick turnaround. So I just want to acknowledge the efforts that they put in. Same with DPW staff. When these events happen, there's still a heavy workload that continues on, and these things add to it, and everyone responded well, and we're happy to be able to join you this evening. So again, this is Ernie West from HDR. They are the ones who are working on our wet weather resiliency plan, and then, as you remember last month or so, there's a change order to add this task to that contract. So, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. Appreciate your time tonight. As Cliff mentioned, I do have some staff members online. I'm not sure we're going to be able to see them, but they'll join me in answering questions that may come up. I will introduce them real briefly here in a minute. I'm not sure you'll see them, but let me get my screen going and we'll get started.
They're going to be muted unless they're talking, and I'm not sure you're going to see them on screen.
Okay, we'll just share the
I
screen
don't think
then.
you will.
You have to do the right click thing again.
Good, okay. So I'm happy to be here tonight. HDR is currently helping the city's wet weather resiliency plan development, as Cliff mentioned. With the large storm events that occurred in June and July of this year, the staff and manager asked us to take a step back and look at those two events and kind of present some findings, impacts, and make sure we consider those events in the course of the rest of our planning efforts for the resiliency plan. So tonight I'm here to present the kind of a summary presentation on the report. There's a pretty detailed report. I think it was in your agenda packet. Probably gets into a lot of weeds. Trying to be a little more high level tonight and kind of present the key takeaways and findings from that report. The agenda, I'll start with some introductions, go through the background analysis that we did regarding these two events, the impacts that the community reported from those events, how we'll take that and work that into the wet weather resiliency plan. We also brought forward some additional steps that the community can consider kind of in parallel with the planning effort as it wraps up over the next year and a half plus. And then hopefully get to your questions and answers and try to make sure we walk away tonight with an understanding of what these storms were and how they impacted the community and what we're going to do with that information. So again, I'm Ernie West. I'm the local face of HDR Michigan. I'm local to the area my whole life. I serve as a water business group manager here. Our new office is up on Coolidge Road, north of Lake Lansing. We've got Tom Petroni, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce them because I'm not sure you can hear them or not, but Tom Petroni out in Pittsburgh, senior water resources engineer who serves as our technical lead on the plan development. And then Julie Stein sits in New York City, New York. She's our national business class director for stormwater. Aaron Little is our senior client scientist out of Kansas City, Missouri. And Ted Theodore Shannon out of Des Moines, Iowa is also a senior resource engineer. So background, probably don't need to remind you all, but the events of 2021, 7.22 inches of rain, 1,000-year event, 220 instances of flooding. And then also in September, a much smaller event caused flooding. That set into motion actions by the city to work on this wet weather resiliency plan. HDR was selected in late 2023 and got under contract in early 2024, and we really started work at the beginning of 2024, February, that is. So early February, we start work on the plan. We're moving along, and then June and July happened with a couple of major events, big-time community impacts. The city responded in several ways. Those response items are shown up there on those bullet points. We were already receiving responses from the public in terms of an open survey that was planned to close around July 5th, right after 4th of July. We kept that survey open in order to get more input from the council or from this community from those January events. And then the city also had a really engaging listening session, at least in my opinion. I stopped by and there were, I think, 55 people that showed up and had one-on-one interviews with staff members and were able to kind of give input into what happened on their properties, what they experienced. And so the last piece of that was really wanting HDR to kind of summarize what we were hearing from the community, look at those storms, place them into context, historical context, and then really look at how can we weave those into the plan development, and then if there were any other kind of additional steps we could take in parallel to kind of help move the community towards a more resilient flooding future. So jumping right into the analysis, we had to use the data that's available. We don't have rain gauges on every corner, but we had 16 available rain gauges on the chart there, on the table there on the right. 3 of those were city-owned and operated that are kind of operated within the utility system. The rest are publicly available. But with that 16 gauges, then we still have to interpolate what's going on between those point sources of information. So we do what's called a gauge-adjusted radar rainfall analysis, a GAR. You'll hear me use that term several times. But we basically are trying to interpolate between those measurement points and fill in the gaps. It also helps us understand the location, the timing, and the potential magnitude of the storm's epicenter, which may or may not have been captured by the gauges that we had. So looking at the June 17th event, it was a quick duration event from a concentrated band of heavy rainfall that moved across the area. The map on the right is from the GAR analysis that we did. You can see the dark red epicenter where we estimate up to 5.3 inches of rain fell locally. The graph on the left kind of charts the cumulative rainfall over time, and you can see the steep part of the curve there, that most of the rain occurred in 2.5 hours or less. So it's a huge amount of rain in a short amount of time. Similar slide for the July 9th and 10th event. The difference here was that event came in a couple different waves. Again, though, you can see a very intense period of right there at the beginning where it's circled in red, and was about less than 3 hours. And the second event was a much longer duration event. Second wave, we'll call it. So after we quantified these events, then we looked to see how they stack up from a frequency of return or historical context. To do that, we look at 60 years of hourly rainfall data from the Capital City Airport. Later on, I'll talk about a changing precipitation conditions report that HDR completed as part of the wet weather planning. But for now, I'll just say that this data set from the airport we found during that effort to be the most complete data set available in the area, and that it's complementary of other data sets that we have, and we think it's representative of what East Lansing sees. Using some statistical analysis, we can estimate the amount of rainfall that's expected to occur over various durations, over various time frames. For example, the 3, 6, 12, 24-hour events, and 1 to 1,000 recurrence intervals. So for example, on this chart, a lot of numbers there, but a 100-year storm event could be expected to produce between 3 and 5 inches of rain, depending on the durations that you're looking at, in hours, I should say. So again, this is all based on that 60-year look back on the data from the airport. We always look back at historical data as a baseline so we can understand trends and help us with projections for the future. So now when you compare those June and July events to kind of that previous table that looked at how much rain you could expect to take to classify into one of those events, this table shows a couple of different sets of comparisons. The one in gray is that GAR estimate that I referenced, which tries to get to combining that point data that's on the ground with the radar data, and helps us make estimates for where we didn't capture maybe the epicenter. So looking at those GAR estimates, those are our estimates using the best available information, and then the one in green there shows the highest observed rain gauge amount that was recorded in the city. So when you look at the June 17th event, we believe the epicenter was in the range of a 200-year event, and then the first wave of the July 9th and 10th event was on the order of a 1,000-year storm. Again, we're using that GAR analysis, and it's estimated to try to fill in those gaps in the data. So looking a little closer at each of those kind of 3 different time frames, the first of July 9th, that first wave, you can see, so this is now comparing, you see the text, the July 9th storm event, 3 hours, GAR epicenter, 6.19 inches. You can see there's only one storm on record at Capital City Airport in the last 60 years with more than 3.5 inches of rain in 3 hours. And there's no storms even close to 6.19 inches in 3 hours. When you look at the June 17th event, a 6-hour event, there's only one storm on record with more than 4 inches of rain in 6 hours. And there's no storms on record of 5.25 inches in 6 hours. And then finally, if you look at the second wave of the July 10th, 9/10 event, there were 7 storms with 3 inches of rain or more in 12 hours over a 60-year period. So even the less severe kind of tail end of that second wave was still a pretty remarkable event. Combine that with the first wave that hit hard up front, it's a pretty significant event. So kind of a high-level summary of our rainfall analysis is, the magnitude of these two events is very significant historically. They have very high return intervals, likely in that 200 to 1,000-year range. We also found that the storm events fit a pattern of storms that we kind of saw develop as we did the analysis as part of the planning effort for the changing conditions, precipitation conditions in the region. We kept seeing these front-loaded, short-duration, high-intensity storms, localized in nature, multiple times, and also corresponding to flooding impacts reported in the city. That whole effort to do that precipitation conditions study led us to the development of what we call a representative storm, which will be important for feeding into the model, the hydraulic computer model that we're going to build. We're in the process of building. And so all that information's documented in a report that was turned over to staff back in July. It's attached to the report that's in the council packet, so you all have access to it. But it really gets into the weeds of kind of the analysis of what the trends are doing over time with precipitation. But we've concluded that that precipitation report is still valid, the findings in it, that these events, because they're so consistent with what we saw over a long period of time, there's no reason to really go back and need to redo that work. And I guess the final kind of takeaway is these events were so significant that it should not be surprising that drainage infrastructure was overwhelmed, given the size of those storms. So the impacts, simply stated, I think, stormwater, drainage systems, whatever you want to call them, are not designed for 200 and 1,000-year events. It's not practical or economically feasible to do so. Most of them are designed for 10-year events, and now as things are changing, these rain events are becoming more common. Communities are struggling with what level of service to now design for. But what happens, because they're not designed to take that water that fast, they're overwhelmed. That water sits there and waits for the system to catch up, for it to catch up and then finally drain. And while it waits, it accumulates in low spots, intersections, low-lying areas. And it's when those intersect with homes and businesses that we see the most impacts. So to try to help the city understand the impacts of flooding in general, and these two events in particular, we collected data from 3 different sources. We had the online survey going that I mentioned early on, where we had 332 responses. Public listening session I mentioned that the city staff hosted, 55 responses. And then an additional 165 responses from staff reported contacts with the public after those events. So we looked at all of those data sets. Not only do we try to understand where those were coming from, which this map kind of shows is distributed, both within the CSO area, which is kind of the lighter gray, whitish area in the middle, and then the separated area, which is the rest kind of in the yellow, and then they're color-coded by the different dots from the source. So we tried to really understand where the impacts were coming from, but then we also wanted to understand what the impacts were, so we did a process where we categorized the different flooding impacts. So you can see the 7 different categories that we try to categorize these to understand what the impacts were. So I don't know if Tom Batroni is able to chime in.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi,
Go ahead,
Ernie.
Tom.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me tonight. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Thank you, community of East Lansing. As Ernie mentioned, I'm a senior engineer at HDR, and I'm based out of Pittsburgh. But I was part of the team who analyzed these survey results. Right here is a snapshot of all the responses that we got for not only all the survey, for but also broken down by the June and July events. We color coded this just for highlighting for everyone to be aware that, basement backups are probably are really a severe health risk. Obviously, anyone's sewage entering or water entering someone's home via a sewage pipe poses a risk to their property and their health. But we wanted to point out that this is only a small portion of all the responses we got. While it is very important to document, it's just important to keep that context in mind when looking at these results. So for basement backups, the top one in green, we had about 13% of the responses for the June event and 19% of the responses for the July event. And then if you look at really like overland flooding, private property, seepage into basements, and maintenance related issues related to people's yards and drainage issues, those were the majority of the responses that we at least analyzed and saw as part of the survey. I think that was just a really enlightening thing for our team and everyone on the project. And I just point out that all the survey responses, there could be multiple properties that have multiple issues happening at once. So that's another issue that we also need to take into consideration, what's going on between multiple issues happening on properties. Next slide. So there's maps for all these categories, but we're only going to show a few of them. All the maps are in the report, but we took those categories, we mapped them for the June and July events. This is for sewage backups. The dots in green are shown here, and the colors are the rainfall that we experienced this is for the July rain event. So really, you can see where the basement backups really are concentrated around the red, and also within the combined sewer system, which are shown in like I want to call the X hatch area in the center of East Lansing. Next map. Yeah, and Glencairn, as we know, which is the combined area of the city, unfortunately saw a lot of the complaints. This is the same map for private property flooding. It's more widespread, obviously. It really concentrated again around that red area, the White Hills, Bailey, and Glencairn neighborhoods. I think we have one more. Next slide, please. And this is street flooding. Again, this is really important, obviously, for public safety issues, for vehicular access, and just making sure that people are not put in harm's way. So this is an important map to understand also for the community of East Lansing, we feel. And again, White Hills, Walnut Heights, and Glencairn, and primarily in the red area again. So just some key takeaways. Next slide. The survey results, what we saw, they really correlate with obviously the high intensity for both rain events. That really, I think, reinforces what Ernie reported on with the intensity of those rain events, also with the complaints that we saw. And then the basement backups, like I said earlier, represented 13% and 19% of the responses for June and July. I think this does reinforce the importance of that backflow prevention program that the city has in place, and to make sure that that's running smoothly and it continues into the future. I think that's a really important program to have and to continue. Again, overland flooding, seepage into basements, private property, private issues that are happening on yards, were the majority of the events. This is 72% of the responses and 64% of the responses for June and July, respectively. This indicates that the public-private issues and education around private property drainages should be a focus of our plan moving forward. And then, yes, streets, like I said, stranded vehicles, vehicular access, especially emergency access for issues like those along those lines is something that needs to be understood and quantified. And it just reinforces the path that the city has already taken. These results in developing and pursuing this wet weather resiliency plan that you guys are going down. The community of East Lansing's going down. So we're really encouraged. These results reinforce that plan and are really going to inform and provide a backbone for moving forward with how we're going to address these issues. Thank you for your time, and I'll pass it back to Ernie at this moment.
So kind of going back to the wet weather resiliency plan, it was envisioned by the city to be foundational, I think, in helping the community become more resilient to changing conditions. The goals shown there up in the top left include understanding the location and the cause of the flooding, the understanding the current and future vulnerabilities, and then trying to develop a holistic approach, I think, that involves the community to really evolve its stormwater management practices, across the organization, across the community. Shown below are kind of the 11 tasks that make up the plan development effort. These were, I thought, very well thought out and prescribed by the city, and we're following those tasks down the line. Task 1 is that changing precipitations conditions report, which we've finished. We've got several tasks all going on concurrently with the kind of looking at future infrastructure resilience framework. We're in the kind of heavy into the data collection, information collection mode, including flow level data out in the field. We're in the process of building a computer hydraulic model and then calibrating it. And then we've also started the public engagement piece on the front end, being where's the problems at. Want to make sure that we're not overlooking anything, and that when we build that model and it's predicting flooding, that it's kind of ground truth by the folks on the ground that experience it. So several of those are underway and will continue through the end of the year. Beginning early next year, we'll get into kind of the next step, which starts to transition more into kind of like alternatives development and vetting. And then we try to position ourselves into kind of pulling everything together, getting public input and feedback on those alternatives, and kind of trying to put together a comprehensive plan, actionable plan. I think our deadline is mid-2026. We're trying to beat that and get this done sooner. But note that this is envisioned by staff and is submitted to the Eagle for funding. It was a 2.5-year project, and we're about a third of the way through right now. So it's a long duration. I understand there's when these events happen, there's urgency to try to learn what we can learn and react and respond, and I think we've made steps to do that, but realize we're also playing the long game here, both with this planning effort and beyond. So some of those plan outcomes that I think are envisioned, development of that 1D, what we call a 1D, 2D hydraulic model that the city currently doesn't have, that kind of meshes both what's going on in the pipes below the ground with what's going on at the surface. That'll be a very valuable tool that the staff currently don't have access to kind of be able to investigate and make plans and decisions around fixing problems. That'll encompass both the CSO area and the separated storm area. We hope to quantify these, and I think we have quantified the changing conditions, precipitation conditions within that report, which will kind of inform, how communities have always done things with precipitation frequency. Well, now we know that, those are short from what we're seeing now currently, and we've got ideas on how to kind of elevate those flows so that we're not continuing to repeat undersizing problems based on changing climate conditions. What'll come out too is probably a prioritized list of projects and costs that we need to figure out how to implement to help some of these areas. And then really take all that and wrap it into an actionable plan that's, vetted by the community and has a way to be implemented. So there will be some resiliency plan limitations. Some of those limitations are shown there in the bullet points. We can't build a system for every storm. That's just a reality. There's reasons not to do that. We also know that there's public infrastructure upgrades that won't help some of the private property flooding issues, depending on topography and other considerations. We all know large capital project efforts take a long time and a lot of money to complete. There's going to be some areas that are easier to fix than others, so how you are able to achieve an equitable distribution of improvements will need to be talked about. And then when we're talking about the precipitation conditions and trying to predict the future, right, it is predictions. It's how good is your crystal ball, so try to be conservative but not too conservative so you don't way overbuild, but you don't want to be short. And it's all about setting those expectations. The key understanding, I think, for the community is to understand these problems, they're not created overnight. There's years and years of development and redevelopment and years of emissions and climate change, and so there's a lot of reasons things are different now than they were 40, 50, 60 years ago, but it's not an overnight solution either. So completing this wet weather plan is just the first step. Implementation of the plan is obviously a long game. Some of the steps towards implementation, talk about identifying funding to support those projects. That's tough here in Michigan without a stormwater utility framework in place. Takes time to design, bid, construct projects. There's additional steps that the community can look at taking to help mitigate locally, climate change issues, and also assist property owners with those kind of private property related issues that can't necessarily be solved by infrastructure. And then with any plan, the best plans have to be a living plan that get updated and adapted based on new information as you move forward. Also, it's going to be probably a burden on the existing resources and staff. It's another thing to advance on top of all the other duties, so that the community needs to keep that in mind and navigate that challenge organizationally. Finally, we're kind of tasked with coming up with some additional steps that the community can consider taking, maybe in parallel with this planning effort. Several of these bullet points here respond to the fact that a lot of that flooding seen this summer may not have a public infrastructure cause or a cure. We can't state with 100% certainty at this point because we're still working through that model building and whatnot. But it seems that a lot of issues are, there's limitations on private infrastructure. How much water can your gutters and downspouts take? How much water can your sump pump move? Can your basement, the swale, drainage swales in your yard convey? So there's a lot going on here and they're not all going to be solved by public infrastructure solutions. So trying to understand what the drainage infrastructure ownership and maintenance responsibilities are. And in some cases, where it's at, who owns it, what it consists of. I think there's some improvements that can be made there. That would help complement, the public infrastructure solutions. Obviously, the ongoing mitigation of the CSO basement backup should be continued with the backflow preventer program while the longer-term sewer separation efforts by the city continue. And then finally, the kind of reviewing site development, site redevelopment standards or design standards for other projects that involve construction of hard surfaces should be looked at. Make sure they're in conformance with the current best practices. With the goal there of making sure that we're not adding to the problem as new projects and new sites are continuing to be built. So again, these are just some examples and suggestions of some things that we thought the city could look at doing in parallel with the plan, can probably be weaved into the plan document itself. Aren't necessarily included right now in our scope of work, but we're trying to work with a team, with the staff to develop a holistic approach, and I think these are things we need to consider.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. Do we have questions from council? Dr. Altman?
There were sewer backups. One of your maps showed that there were sewer backups outside the CSO area. How did that happen?
I don't know if we have 100% knowledge, and the city can chime in here too if they have information. I mean, there can be separated sanitary sewer impacts from wet weather where flows get high and cause a backup. So that's probably the likely cause, if I had to guess. But I don't know, Ron, if you ever Cliff.
Well, on top of that too, a lot of this was self-reported, and I wouldn't expect someone to necessarily be able to draw that distinction between basement backup and basement flooding. If I come down my stairs and it's wet, that's one of the reasons we had the listening session, so we could try to peel that out of people. But a lot of this stuff was done virtually. I would anticipate, and Ron can jump into that. Some of those are reported, but maybe not exactly distinguished in that category.
Yeah, and I would second that. A lot of times when we go out to homes, a lot of these homes have been added on too many times, and people don't understand all of their drainage pipes, where they go, how they're connected. Homer Allen and I went to a house in the Shaw Estates neighborhood where that homeowner was convinced it was the street flooding that was causing his issue. We talked with him for a little while, walked around his house, and lo and behold, the drain where the water was coming up wasn't even connected to the sewer system at all once he did the additional investigation. So these are not simple problems to figure out. You have floor drains in the floor. Most likely you don't have the original owner in that house, and there's just speculation on where all that stuff is connected and how it's connected. So it's very difficult to determine in a lot of cases what the exact cause of a sewer backup is, if it's in fact coming from the sewer system or some other problem around the house.
In principle, though, so that all makes perfect sense, but in principle, if we understood and had perfect knowledge of everything, then we would not find sewer backups in combined sewer areas, right? In an event like this.
In separate sewer areas?
In separate sewer areas, yeah.
Yes, there should not be sewage coming back from the sanitary system into the house during a storm event. Now, with that being said, some of our sanitary sewers are not 100% dry. They're not isolated. There's groundwater seepage. There's some older areas where there's floor drains and things connected to the sanitary. So even though it's not the catch basins along the curb don't drain into the same pipe, these are not all isolated 100% dry systems.
Got it.
So but generally speaking, yes, that's accurate.
And then my other question was, so there's the sewer backups, and then there's the other category, all the other stuff, overland flooding, seepage, all those things. Do you have a sense of what proportion of those types of incidents in the cases we had, what proportion could be solved if we sent a consultant out and help the homeowner figure out, do some sleuthing? So we've had two instances, all I can say is we've had two instances in our house over the years where we had seepage in the basement, and one was a downspout that got disconnected that we figured out the hard way, and the other one was a driveway that was pushing water into the foundations, and when we had the driveway repaved, it took care of that. So how many of those cases could we address with some help that would help people remediate those conditions on their property?
I think it would solve quite a few of them. Would it fix all of the problem? I can't tell you, but I've literally been on probably not exaggerating to say hundreds of these over my career here at the city, and you peek behind people's bushes and their downspout extensions aren't even connected to the
Yep.
downspout, or it's been run over by the mower 17
Yep.
times, so it's flat. There's plants growing out of the gutters, that type of thing. It's always surprising to me when we go to houses what people don't see when they're at the house every day,
Yep.
or what they don't check. So that's an accurate statement that a lot of this is related to private property maintenance. Now, that's not to at all to take away from the public, sewer impacts of these events, but that is a real thing. And along with what Ernie West said, is your gutters are not designed for a 1,000-year event either. So in that same rain event where the street's flooding, your gutters are probably overflowing all around your house and dumping all that water, right at your foundation. I'll let Cliff do the math on a X square foot house, how much water was generated by these rain events just from the roof alone.
Yeah, so a 2,500 square foot home, in a 9-inch rain event, that's over 14,000 gallons of runoff just from that rooftop. That's ignoring the driveway, the patio, the shed, the road. Scale that up. The big shopping grocery center at Lake Lansing, Marfet. I did some rough numbers on that. Just this is napkin math in terms of the square footage, but you're talking millions, over 3 million gallons in a 9-inch rain event like that. So there's an immense amount of water that can come off your own property, and managing it, there's many different ways you can manage it. But to get to the root of your question, yes, I think that there's a lot of help that the residents could get from something like that, but I also think that there's a role for us. With our newsletter that's going out, like the Curbside Journal, we're already starting some of that about like good downspout practices. And to echo Ron, this is not to discount the very, real challenges that we face as a public with our public infrastructure. But there are some easy wins out there that I think there's an opportunity to take advantage of. But then there's some more challenging ones too. I have an eye for this stuff now because I'm driving around. And I work at the city and live in the city, and my family all lives in the city. I was over at my sister's house a few days ago, driving there or biking there, and I was just like looking at some of the houses and the landscaping they had done. It's graded back into their foundation, so it's not sheet flowing out into the storm infrastructure. It's coming back to them, and that is something that I would think a landscaper would hopefully catch, but we could do a good job of equipping residents with, what to look for, what questions to ask. But that is a very real thing that is out there. And, most of the time it's people who purchased a home and it already had that. It's nothing that anyone did wrong. But they are contributing factors in an event like this.
And then, can you give us a ballpark? So I think Ron mentioned that gutters are going to be overflowing too if everything else is overflowing. Can you give us a sense of what size storm event is a standard gutter designed for? I mean, in these storm events, would in fact the gutters have been overflowing? You don't know because every roof's going to be a little bit different, but.
Yeah, I don't know what they're designed for, but I mean, like anything else, you'd have a huge trough on the side of your house if they were designed for these very infrequent events. So I would have to do some research as to whether there's an actual design storm for a gutter, but I'm pretty confident it's not a 1,000-year storm.
Yeah, I know you can get some larger diameter, not diameter, but width ones, because I looked that up on July 10th because I had water in my basement where I had some overflow, a very particular spot where water came in and it correlated with the spot that it was overflowing from. So I looked into that myself, but then you also have to increase the amount of diameter for what's shipping it out. And I've buried mine and then created pop-outs about 15 feet away from the foundation. So there are things you can do, but I couldn't give you a number. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I just know mine at home have overflowed 3 times this summer. So, it's probably 10 years or less if I had to guess an average design.
Other questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions.
Please.
Just a couple. Can we get a copy of whatever rules we're applying to that backup program, the installation, the basic installation, what would prevent it from happening and what allows it to happen in a particular property. And then one of the things that was listed in this report that I thought would be a good thing for us to do, it talked about the private drainage systems and mapping those. I think that we should do that. You know, I live in a condo, so this is a private drainage system that's in there, and it seemed to work pretty good during this particular storm. In the past, we have had water go into some of the basements in the condominium, but in this particular instance, we had a lot of water go into several of them. And when we had an independent engineer come out to evaluate our drainage system and make recommendations as to how we could improve it, he also confirmed your gutters don't mean anything when we have the volume of water that was falling on at that particular time. Because once they fill, that water just blows out into those yards. And that was part of the problem that we dealt with. And I don't think there's any size gutter that's gonna take care of that problem with that type of a storm. But I do think that if we could map that, that'd be fine, because this Jim wasn't the only Jim who called me. The Jim who actually lives in my former house called me because there's a private drain that is in the backyard of the property that's behind him. And when that drain in a situation like this is not functioning correctly, the water just comes right up to the house and fills that entire back area, and eventually makes its way into a basement that had a B-dry system that had been prepared actually to take care of this type of stuff. So there must be a lot more of those in the city, and I think we need to know where those are so that we can monitor that, but also maybe make some other suggestions as to how those might work better. So those are my comments on that.
Any other questions or concerns or comments? Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
It was very clear to me, the 200-year event, 1,000-year event, how rare that is, looking back the last 60 years. And you're building, I just want to make sure I understand, you're building a model to help us project when or how often those events could impact our community moving forward. And I get a model, like it's not perfect science, so.
Yep. So the model that we're building is a hydraulic model that we can then apply different levels of rain events to and see what the impacts are, see where the water backs up, estimate how much it's going to back up, how far it'll spread out. So that's the model piece. The kind of the rainfall analysis that we did basically looked at all that data and showed the trend line for the last 60 years. And Tom, if you can speak to this, or Aaron, we looked at the increase over that 60-year period, and really since the mid to late 70s is when it really ticked up.
After
so we've
my
kind of
birth,
quantified.
76.
Yep.
Sorry, I was trying to make a joke to add entertainment to the discussion, sorry.
We kind of saw where it ticked up in the mid to late 70s, and we've quantified kind of what that increase is. And so we've, instead of the city, as we look at designing new developments, new infrastructure, instead of using curves that were from back in the 70s or 90s, now we've got those have been updated, so we can say, okay, you need to apply this much rain. Now this is all in development and needs to go through a process to get accepted. So there's the process of what's happened in the last 50, 60 years, which I think we've done, and then also looking at the climate change models, and there's a whole bunch of climate change models, but we looked at a range of them, and so you take where we're at today, depending on how bleak or optimistic you want to be, you can add another 8 to 20% on top of that.
Right.
So, I think the number was 30%, and Tom helped me out, but I think it was like 30% increase in 50 years, and then you're talking another 8 to 20, depending on where the climate heads.
It was an additional, I think, over the last 30 years, there was a 30% increase, but then the numbers that they've come up with, and the worst case scenario being that the global community does not hit emissions targets in the year 2100, what do we expect based off trends and a variety of models? The reason for that is we're putting infrastructure in the ground that has a 75-year life cycle. We don't want it to be a moment in time in terms of what it can accept and manage. And as I already said, there's only so much you can manage, but we don't want something that's going to be in doing work for us as a community in the year 2100 to be based off of numbers from 1982.
Right.
So that is a component of the planning process.
That is being pulled together.
Yes.
Okay, good.
And then the model, there was a great slide that showed this one right here, just kind of what we're expected to get out of this, and Ernie can jump in too, but tonight, is focused on primarily what did we see with that storm and the impacts of the community and the quick turnaround. It's hard to have a consultant think about and really dive into infrastructure improvements, and frankly, there's not enough time between when this was put their scope of work and in this presentation. So a lot of the items that they referenced and that we talked about were things that we can do at the same time as this. But I do want to reiterate that the ultimate goal of this project will be able to identify where we're likely to see flooding currently, where we're likely to see flooding in worst case scenarios, and then also inputting solutions, like what happens if we put an underground detention basin under the Hannah Community Center soccer field. This is general. What is that going to do? And then be able to actually assess and see if there's actually an impact, and then build infrastructure priorities and the CIP based on that. And so this kind of information is something that many communities don't have. Your New Yorks, your Houstons, your Pittsburghs, they have that. But I will say, in my stormwater world, I've been like the chair-elect for the statewide stormwater group and stuff. So I'm dealing with a lot of these other communities and peers. Like, this is really exciting that the city is able to add this to our tool belt. And I think it's going to make a big difference. But I do want to highlight that what we talked about tonight was more things that we can do at the same time as this planning effort, but the ultimate goal is to figure out what can we put in the ground, how can we manage this water from a public infrastructure standpoint. But it's really important to have this data to be able to make sound decisions related to that.
No, that's helpful, and I think, from, this chair understanding the process, and as we are stewards of the taxpayer dollars and understanding the data and where the projections, where the most significant impacts to our community, so we can work collectively to place those right investments moving forward. So I appreciate, Cliff, what you just kind of walked through in terms of where we're headed. And I do also appreciate what we've also covered, what homeowners can do in the short term as well. But we are facing some, pretty stark examples, what we've lived through this summer, and unfortunately what we may see more of here in the future. I do want to share one piece I was going to read during council comments regarding the open houses. I just want to share this from a resident in Old White Hills. In reflection, I've had more contact with city workers in the last 2 to 3 months than I have in the 10 years previous. I've been in my house. It's all been outstanding. Some specific examples. In July, with all the flooding, I called DPW. A human answered the phone and she took down my info. 2 DPW workers came by a few hours later to see the issue. Second example, White Hills Drive is being reconstructed with water main replacement. We've lost water a couple of times. I called the utility, another human answered the phone and then called back within an hour to give an update on when I should expect water to be restored. The third, in preparation for this open house, the same person from the first call called out of the blue to invite me to come. So this is just high praise, again, of the city staff and that engagement with the community. So I appreciate all those door calls that you were heading out to evaluate and the open houses that the city has mobilized. So I just want to say it's being recognized. We have more work to do. We will continue doing it, but I think I want to recognize that because it's really important work you're doing. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Ms. Watson, did you have something?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
The slide that had the additional steps, what page is that on in the report?
Page 31, I believe.
Sorry, it's at page 31. I drove past the quarters and saw that the cars were flooded again. What happens when that happens for the person's car? I want to let them, yeah.
You can take it. I mean, that is a private property issue for them. Their system does not drain by gravity, the sewer system. That part of the parking lot is too low to drain by gravity. So that is pumped. That little setup they have by Abbott Road is a pump system. And so when that doesn't function, that lower part of the parking lot floods or gets overwhelmed. So that's a private property issue between them and their tenants. So that's dealt with on that side. So I really don't know the outcome of what happens to that car or the owner of that car.
Go ahead.
Just to add some context to that too, city staff stopped by prior to the event in July and asked management to notify the residents not to park in that lower parking lot because of what happened in June was probably going to happen again in July. And I don't know if that message got out to some of the tenants who chose to park in that lower parking lot. But they did file claims with the city, but those were denied because, again, it's a private property matter.
Okay, so other claims of cars that flooded on our streets, those claims did go through?
I don't know the outcome of those. We forward the claim information to our insurance carrier, and they in turn process them and look at them compared to the law and decide whether to honor those claims or deny the claims.
Okay.
I'm not aware of the outcome of every claim that's come in.
So, go ahead.
And typically, especially for sewer backups, this is all guided by what is it, PA 222, I think. There's a pretty high threshold for when a claim would be successful, and a lot of it has to do with the design storm. So if it's something where the city or the city's infrastructure failed to move the amount of water that it was designed for and it caused harm, then that would be applicable. This is my understanding. But if it's beyond the design criteria, it's kind of viewed as like an act of nature or something to that effect. But I know that that's a pretty high bar, I think. But it's
Okay.
not something I deal with day to day, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, thank you, because insurance is interesting how you pay for it, but then when you need it, they bounce you around.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm interested in harm reduction for people. And so as we have this study that's going to be 12 months plus, I'm interested in the next event, which will happen in under 12 months, and harm reduction, how, and I liked what you said about getting the word out in the newsletter, but also do we have a web page or somewhere where people can go to record their issues, but also to get some type of assistance when it happens?
So yes to the reporting. There's two different sides to this. For these events, the survey that went out predated, or it came out well before these events, because that was just part of the public engagement component of the wet weather resiliency plan, and then we had those two wet weather events in the middle of it. But that has shifted it back to normal. I believe that closed in like August 19th or something to that, around there. I don't think that there's a specific stormwater or flooding reporting page at current, but we could certainly create that. There's a avenue to report any issue with DPW online, or obviously you can call, but there's not a flood specific resource. There are a number of resources for stormwater in general, like stormwater education. Those are typically oriented towards stormwater quality versus quantity and flood impacts. Those are the outgrowth of our Phase 2 requirements under the Federal Clean Water Act. So we do a lot of stormwater education that's mandated by EGLE and by association EPA. But we could certainly expand it to cover these issues. And that's part of what we want to take is these recommendations and then find a way to craft a message that is most usable and accessible and of use to people. But that's certainly something that we could do.
And the final thing to add is a price tier. Some people can't afford to do such and such, but they, can't afford to do other things. For example, my basement flooded. I could afford to buy some caulk and put it in a hole, but that doesn't mean I fixed the problem. But that's what I could afford to do at the time. But so it would also be nice for people to understand that these are your options and also the cost, because not everybody can just afford to, fix their basement.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as private property, in a normal, just to go back to your previous question, a normal rain event, if anybody has a sewer backup, they call DPW or they call the police non-emergency number if it's after hours, and we respond 24/7, always respond to every call of a sewer backup to make sure that it's not our issue and to make sure we understand what happens. In a big storm event, we have 6 sewer staff on the operations side, so they can only handle so much. We throw virtually everybody at DPW at events like that, and we try to respond because you have to, if you let people report after the fact, a lot of times you don't know. It doesn't give you the information of what occurred, how was our system performing, because they're not going to pop the manhole covers out in the street and see, is our sewer surcharged, isn't it surcharged, is this a private lead, is plugged up, that type of thing. So it's really important that we respond, and every time we respond, we record that data in our GIS system, what the complaint was, what information we get from the property owner, what they knew, what our response was, the depth of the water in the sewer, that type of thing. So we try to gather that data every time we're called. A big storm event, some of that data gets lost because there just isn't the time to collect it all, or by the time we get there, what happened is already over, and all we see is the water line on whatever it was. So we do try to make an effort to get to each site just so we get that firsthand knowledge. But as far as private property issues, those are very complicated. I've been, like I said, to hundreds of them, and some of them you can say, yep, there's your problem. Your downspout's disconnected, or it's crushed, or do you know you got a little yard drain. Do you know where that goes? And lo and behold, they didn't, and it's buried somewhere. But a lot of it, it's not that easy. You can go in somebody's basement and poke around for hours, and we've tried dye testing, we've done lots of things trying to help people figure it out, and sometimes you just can't. The houses have been added onto and that type of thing. So it's unfortunately more times than not, we can't determine with what tools we have to do that, and we're not allowed to spend public dollars on private property issues. So there's a limit to what we can do.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from council? Dr. Altman.
Thank you, Mayor. I have raised the issue previously that we have too much impermeable surface. We have too much concrete and too much pavement. And one of the suggestions toward the end of the presentation was that we think about reviewing site development requirements. And I think we lost an opportunity to do something along those lines with the Puff Puff project up on Lake Lansing, where they took out the need for a bunch of pavement, but they didn't take out the pavement, and we approved it anyway. There's another project in the pipeline that will aggravate stormwater issues on Grove Street. And so I guess my question is there support or reason to think about something like a 6-month moratorium on development projects until we can do an audit of our site development standards? Because otherwise, we're making decisions now that are going to have negative effects for a long time to come, and that we don't have to make right now if we potentially wait 6 months and figure out whether our site development standards are what they need to be. And I guess that's a question for the engineers, but also a question for my colleagues, whether that's something they'd be interested in.
So is that a rhetorical question?
No,
Or-
it's a question.
Okay. So you want the engineers to answer that question?
From the perspective of, would it be useful to have 6 months, or and feasible to have 6 months in which to review our site development standards to decide whether they're where we need them to be? Is that something we could do in 6 months?
I mean, I think it's something that can be looked at for kind of maybe the low-hanging fruit type of thing. I mean, it's in a lot of our areas, a lot of the developed areas, it's almost 100% pavement already. So unless we're gonna look at requiring kind of a settlement type of standard, to retain or deal with stormwater, but that would effectively end development in some areas because it would make it cost prohibitive because these sites are already 100% paved. So to stop a project from being a 100% impervious surface to 100% impervious by making them go to pre-settlement. So you gotta, there's trade-offs, obviously. There's development, what's the word I'm looking for? That it's gonna push down development in some areas that are already developed, but I do think it's a worthwhile discussion. I mean, I've been here a long time, and 8-foot sidewalks along every major street. Do we really need that everywhere? I mean, those are discussions that need to be had, or do we just need a network of those? Those are all decisions that I think we can have over time that can help reduce the hard surface moving forward. But development standards are a hard one because you gotta weigh development, which is good and healthy for the community, against the stormwater aspect of it.
And there are examples, Ron referenced pre-settlement. So what that's referring to, in a way, like our stormwater post-construction requirements, basically, a very simplified way says that the post-construction runoff that's being generated can't be more than the pre-construction condition, pre-development condition. That's oversimplification. That's like for the 90th percentile storm. There's much more to it. Stephen can tell you all about it. But the pre-development means before that, if there's a construction project that comes downtown, pre-development for that means like before that project starts. If it's already a parking lot, well, the pre-development rate is going to be the same. Doesn't matter if it's a parking lot or if it's a building. Some communities, to my understanding, like Washtenaw County and others, they require pre-settlement. So what that means is basically it's a native condition. Like Ron said, that can be prohibitively expensive. That can be a tough environment for developers, but it is something that is done, that could be done. There's those requirements that we have are for projects of an acre or more, or part of a project that is, multiple components add up to an acre or more. These follow well-established requirements from EGLE, the EPA. That's kind of the standard, but there are communities who shrink that. I was talking to Grand Rapids. We had a meeting last week, and they said that they were doing 2,500 square feet. And so there's not a ton of development in the city. I mean, I'm not in the planning department, so I don't have these numbers, but like the acre's pretty big. There's a lot of these small office complexes and a little kind of smaller developments that wouldn't apply to the post-construction standard, which is not just volume reduction, but total suspended solids, basically removing the surrogate contaminant out of the first flush of rainwater. So there are options, and there's others on the call, I believe, who probably have seen other examples throughout the country. I don't know who's still on, but if there's a value in that.
Tom or Julie, do you want to speak
I
to
could
any of
weigh
that?
in. Yeah, I can weigh in here. Just from I'm getting a little echo. Okay, thank you. Just from my perspective here in Pittsburgh, I was part of the code review and a code and ordinance changes here for the city of Pittsburgh, which was a 2-year process. But to do just essentially the evaluation of the code and maybe the gap analysis, the 6 months does sound reasonable. But overall, here in the city of Pittsburgh, we have a threshold of 5,000 increase of impervious surfaces. It triggers a stormwater permit, or 10,000 square feet of disturbance, of area disturbance triggers a stormwater permit. And with that permit requires volume control, which means you have to control the water quality, like Cliff said, and you also need to control the rate up to the 100-year event. And included as part of the city of Pittsburgh's was we did the same future climate analysis, and we included those future climate rainstorms as part of that evaluation in order to get that permit. So that, but it is a lot like there is a balancing act, like Ron said, with understanding how those rules would impact not only the development community but also the regular homeowner. Even doing a regular project or on a private lot, these are all things that it is a public education issue that I think that's a common theme I've heard a lot tonight, but there is along these ordinances, it requires an education component as well. And City of Pittsburgh's a little bit, maybe a little bit more, the bureaucracy, if you will, is a little bit larger of a city. So maybe 2 years might be not quite as long for East Lansing, but the point is that whenever you go and try to change a code and ordinance, is that you do need to. I'd highly recommend getting not only the development community's input, but also everyone, the general broader community at large. That way they know what's being done. I pass the mic to anyone else who wants to chime in from HDR, but that's my experience.
Any other questions or any other questions from council?
Just a moment.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask again, because my page 33 is different from your page 33. What page 33 is the additional steps on? Is it in the 193-page report, or so the slide that showed the additional steps, where is that at in the 193-page report?
It would be the last slide of the PowerPoint, but it's also in the report. Let me see. I got 193 pages printed out here.
Page 31. Page 31 of the 193 report. Is that what someone said?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I will look at that. And then in response to your remark, Councilmember Altman, I would be open to offering ideas for people that maybe want to build in this 6-month time frame on how they can support our sewer systems. And I would also be in support of talking to people that have already built about ways that they can help our community and help the flooding and stuff. So just in response to what you asked. And that's all. Thanks.
Okay, are we ready to move on?
We had one more
I have to make
section.
one final comment, if I may. Mayor.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you. So my broader question is, so we have a diagnosis now, in some sense, and I want to thank everybody who put a lot of work into this, DPW, city manager, HDR. And I think as a municipality, we're probably ahead of other municipalities, is what people have been saying in terms of our planning for this effort. At the same time, a lot of the pictures in the report are gut-wrenching and they're awful. So my question now is sort of what do we do to keep momentum and make sure that stormwater factors into our thinking in all the different ways that it needs to factor into our thinking. So planning, backflow preventer, consulting with property owners, new changes to the engineering of the sewer system, whatever it is. There's a broad range of approaches we need to take to this. And operationally, as an organization, what's the plan for making sure that we sort of keep the ball rolling on this?
And I did want to quickly, if you want to read in the report in the interest of time, I'll cut it short. But we've spent $160 million on the sewer system since 2013. There's a list of projects there, and two of which, a $27 million project at the plant, and
$19.3 million for a Grand River, Cedar Village kind of area. That project is slated for funding and construction in 2025. We just got notice yesterday that it looks good that the whole project will receive funding, SRF funding. So we'll continue to work on that, and we continue to put projects in on that. Cliff informed me recently that stormwater projects are now SRF eligible, so that will open up additional, granted, it's more projects competing for the same
Oh, that's great.
funding. Hopefully they increase funding, but that'll open up. That's part of the reason no big projects for stormwater only, and there wasn't a funding source. And so I'll be interested to see how that whether they increase the funding to increase the demand there. But so we still continue to spend money. Like I said, 160 million so far, 51 on the sewer system itself, and 110 on the WRF, which handles obviously combined sewage as well. So we have done a ton of work since 13, and we will continue to do so. There's lots of projects in the queue for project plans and SRF funding down the road. So that'll continue parallel with the wet weather plan.
And there's additional policy, potential policy changes that we've been tossing around as well. In terms of momentum, I think the plan will keep us in line, but this is also just frankly a personal interest of mine too, as a resident as well. I was busy pumping water out of my mother-in-law's basement on Oxford, and then over on Wallbridge for my sister, and my own house. And as long as I'm here, this would be my priority. But I am interested in, and the Commission on the Environment is also interested in a green infrastructure audit, which would look at full code review, not necessarily site review, but looking for obstacles to nature-based solutions for things. Like, do we need curb around our cul-de-sacs, or can we just drain it into that that green space there? About parking lot requirements, landscaping. Maybe there's an opportunity to do a task force or something, or a better term for it, but it needs to be integrated into all components of city life. This is the climate change challenge of our time for the Midwest. It's going to keep reminding us of that, unfortunately. But one last thing I wanted to mention, kind of on those potential policy changes, is that there are some creative things out there, and they're not far away. Diamonddale, the village of Diamonddale, has a 200 square foot requirement for post-construction requirements. Basically, if you're putting in a shed, if you're putting in any kind of hardscape, you're expanding your driveway, you have to show them the calculations of increased runoff and what you're going to do to stop it. Rain gardens, rain barrels.
Yep.
That's what happens when your village president is Ralph Resnick, and he used to be the senior stormwater engineer for Eagle. But there are some very interesting things, and we have a lot of ideas, but I'm trying to figure out a way to communicate them to council and find something that's palatable for the council, for the community, for the development community. It's going to be a bigger conversation, and one that I think is naturally going to take place throughout this planning effort.
Thanks, that answers my question.
Okay, we all set? Thank you very much for the presentation. It is my intent to plow on tonight, unless somebody wants to take a break.
Yeah, just 5 minutes.
So let's take a 10-minute break, please. 8:49, and we're on agenda item 7.2, discussion of City Hall security upgrades. Deputy Chief.
Good evening, Mayor Brookover, Mayor Pro Tem, and City Council members. Thank you for the opportunity to present and discuss these important recommendations with you tonight. The goal of the East Lansing Police Department is to secure our buildings for officials, employees, and visitors. That goal aligns with our strategic priority of 2025, and that is to collaborate with the East Lansing Police Department to create plans and prepare our city for an active violent incident, an AVI situation, similar to what MSU experienced in February 13th. So in February of 2024, the East Lansing Police Department created two committees, a safety committee and a security committee, to look at the security recommendations from security assessments that were done in 2009, 2014, 2022, and again in 2024. So these assessments made it very clear that the security at City Hall should be a priority for the city. It should be noted that our court system is only one of two courts in the entire state of Michigan that does not have a comprehensive security system in place. So what needs to be done? I have 5 action items that I'm going to recommend tonight. The first is to limit public entrance to one door at City Hall. There are 2 public doors on the west side of the building, and either of those could be used. It would be my recommendation that the northwest door be used for public access. This is for easier monitoring and quicker threat detection. All other doors at City Hall would be secured with electronic card readers, and proximity access cards would be distributed to all of our employees. These proximity cards are encrypted, they're very secure, they're easy to manage, and this is something that would be done by our IT department and our human resources department. On top of the one public entrance, the next recommendation would be to have a metal detection system at that one public entrance door. Our recommendation is to use OpenGate. This is the same system that Michigan State University currently has in place, and it is unlike other metal detectors in the sense that it detects multiple caliber weapons and IEDs. It is more cost efficient, it has fewer false alarms, and it's portable. I know some of you guys were able to join a demo that I hosted in July of 2024, and that was the OpenGate system that was demoed that day. We would hire an outside third-party security guard company to monitor OpenGate. They would conduct secondary screening if necessary, and then contact law enforcement should they need additional assistance. We would also purchase a handheld wand or detection for security screening when needed. The third recommendation would be to expand the proximity access card and security systems across the entire city once City Hall security is completed. The next recommendation would be to unify our camera system and security systems. So currently, right now, we have different systems for our facilities, for our parking department, and our downtown. So we recommend using a Genetec platform for access control and video management. This is the same system that Michigan State University currently uses. It actually integrates that camera system and integrates the security system, and then it would allow for future expansion at minimal cost. Lastly, the recommendation would be to implement the Stop the Bleed program. This is a worldwide recognized program that teaches individuals how to respond in an emergency situation where there is life-threatening bleeding incidents. So we have 17 current instructors between the East Lansing Fire Department and the East Lansing Police Department. We would use these instructors to train all of our city employees. That would be in combination with cost-efficient medical kits placed at all of our city buildings. So as a trained police officer, I can read your facial expressions and your body language, and I can see that you're thinking, how do we pay for this? So prior city manager, acting city manager, Randy Talaferro, wrote a grant prior to his departure, and that grant asked for funding to increase security in city buildings. At the end of this month, we will receive a grant from the federal government for $1.5 million. So a portion of that funding would go to those 5 recommendations that I've just made. So in conclusion, these proactive security measures are essential to safeguard our community and ensure that East Lansing remains a safe and secure place for everyone. We need council support to implement these initiatives and protect our well-being of our citizens and the integrity of our public institutions. So please let me know if you have any questions and what next steps are needed to implement these recommendations.
Any questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment, if I may.
Sure.
Which, I think I've been around for most of these reports on the public safety in the building. And in the past, I would just say that City Council has been reluctant to go forward because of the cost associated with it. The cost with regard to the report that we've just received is substantially less than anything we've heard in the past. And I think myself and the Mayor Pro Tem, went through the system that was being proposed here when there was a demonstration at City Hall. A lot different than what we have seen in other public buildings throughout the area, and much easier to manage and easier for the individual to pass through. Because if we do go with the northwest entrance, that's the main entrance into City Hall for most of our citizens who come in. So I'm very supportive of the report that you've provided for us. I'm really excited about the fact that we've got $1.5 million to actually implement all this stuff. And I think I would be supportive of us getting some kind of resolution or ordinance that would implement this.
I didn't catch, I heard the big figure on the grant, but do you have a figure for what these things would cost? Yeah.
I do. The total with the camera system is approximately $495,000. So the grant is for security enhancements in total. That also includes bollards. So only a portion of that $1.5 million would be used to cover these security recommendations. We approximate that grant money to be about $356,000.
Okay, well, let me reinterpret that. So the grant, the subset of money necessary to complete your 5 recommendations for tonight is nested in the total amount of the grant.
That's correct.
Correct? Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What happens to these meetings, city council meetings? Do we have security for those, or?
I'm sorry, is the question what happens for security for city council?
Yeah, so we don't meet in City Hall any longer, do we? I don't feel a need for security, but others may, and that's fine. Are we going to implement something here also? Is that the plan?
Sure, that's a great question, and that was one recommendation, is that we actually implement a proximity access reader system at all of the buildings.
Okay, that's what that was.
That open gate system that we spoke about and demoed, it is very portable, so should there be a need on a particular occasion for that to move from City Hall to another city building, it can easily be loaded into a truck and then lifted into a particular entrance if needed.
So would that be the plan for Tuesday nights, is to move those things from City Hall over here every Tuesday?
We would not do that unless there was a risk associated with a particular meeting.
So I'm a little confused about why. I mean, if you go to a MSU Board of Trustees meeting, as I did recently, you have to check in through one of these systems. And so their legislative body has a certain protection. But we've decided that we're probably not going to give the East Lansing legislative body that same protection.
Eric, I don't think that's been decided.
It's my question, Mayor, if I may.
Well, I'm trying to answer your question.
I'm not asking you.
Okay, fine, go ahead.
If I may, right now, priority has been to City Hall because of the courts. and the elections.
Okay.
To expand into other facilities with that metal detector, that would be additional contributions that we would have to make through the general fund. And as Deputy Chief Brown indicated, the cost of what she shared was $495,000. Grant will cover $356,000, so the general fund is going to come up with about $139,000 on that.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you. And then the other comment that I wanted to make back when we decided to support the Advanced Peace Initiative, which was money well spent, is we should be suing the gun manufacturers to get payment for this stuff because they're the ones who are causing the problem. And I realize this is a somewhat rhetorical comment, but it seems to me that people who are causing the problem should be paying for this, and that's, as I say, it's a rhetorical comment. I'll leave it there.
Mr. Bellman, do you have a recommendation with regard to this report?
So my recommendations are the 5 action items Deputy Chief Brown presented to you will be brought to you in a future meeting for your formal approval to proceed with the investments and the use of the private security company, which will have an annual cost going forward.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Item 7.3, discussion on pretextual stops. Mr. Bellman.
So this item you had taken up at your June 11th meeting. You had about 8 questions that you wanted. So the request, as was presented earlier, was from the East Lansing Independent Police Oversight Commission asking you to adopt an ordinance prohibiting law enforcement officers from stopping or detaining an operator occupant of a motor vehicle based on race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, socioeconomic status, age, cultural group, or disability, which I believe you received a communication from the city attorney on that portion of the request, and I believe it's indicated state law already prohibits that from occurring.
Okay, discussion or questions from council?
Second part of the request was law enforcement officers employed by the City of East Lansing Police Department shall not stop or detain the operator or occupant of a motor vehicle based solely on the following offenses: cracked or chipped windshield, loud exhaust, tinted windows, objects hanging from rearview mirror, cracked, broken, or burnt out tail lamp, where at least one tail lamp remains functional and properly illuminated, registration plate lighting violations, registration plate violations regarding plate height or attachment, location of a registration sticker, peeling registration sticker, location of a temporary or paper registration plate so long as it remains visible from the rear of the vehicle, defective equipment, other non-safety violation, and registration tags expired less than 90 days. So there's 2 things. First of all, we did have policies in the police department that would classify that list as secondary offenses and not primary offenses. If my recollection serves on that policy, that was changed in May of this year. That really reinstated an officer's discretion, depending on the situations, on whether or not to stop a vehicle with any of these violations.
Okay, questions, concerns? I have to say that I frankly need some more time to peruse all this information. And so I'm really not willing to commit one way or the other on this issue tonight. I'd like to have some time to take a look at this, including the Ann Arbor ordinance and the changes in what I'm going to call procedures with our police that were instituted, because I just need to think about this and read this stuff further. So that's sort of where I am tonight. Mr. Meadows?
Yeah, I think, some more time on this would be useful. I know that LAPOC has been waiting since January for us to do something with regard to this, but as I've indicated previously, I don't have a particular problem with the Ann Arbor ordinance. I do note that even though we have a civil rights ordinance in the city of East Lansing, we don't really direct any part of that towards the police department. And what the Ann Arbor ordinance did in its first real section, made a point of making sure that police officers employed by Ann Arbor were aware of that civil rights ordinance. With regard to the remaining part of their ordinance, which talked about the specific pretextual type of violations, I think we need to have a little longer discussion about each one of those. We have a noise issue in the city of East Lansing that relates to loud exhausts, and that is one of the items that's in the Ann Arbor ordinance as not being something you might stop somebody for unless something else is taking place. We really don't have a definition of tinted windows because there are tinted windows that aren't super dark, and then there are tinted windows, so I don't know what is illegal or not illegal under the state statute. So that type of conversation, I think, is something that we need to have at another meeting.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ms. Watson.
I thought this was a discussion, so I didn't think we were making any decisions today.
We're not, I think.
Okay,
It is a
so-
discussion.
All right. And so there is a part that talked about the tinted windows, and that is on the yeah, they attached the Michigan tinted window law. So I'm concerned about any delay tactics that might be happening, seeing as this has been asked of us since January. We discussed it again in June. And as far as the noise situation goes, we have noise ordinances, or we have ways that we can still address noise issues without being concerned about what the impact would be for people driving around with loud exhausts. And I just want to say, as a representative of the Black community, a person who represents the Black community, I have been pulled over for these things. So this is happening for a larger percentage of Black and brown people. There's multiple statistics and data that show us that. And so please be an ally and do something where maybe we're not given as hard of a time as Black and brown drivers.
Okay, well, just referring to your comment, I mean, one of the things I want to be looking at here is the concept of probable cause. And I always hesitate to get into my history as a litigator, but I'm going to. So one of my first cases when I started practicing here was concerning a stop on MSU campus of an African-American individual. And one of the things I'm going to look at is the status of the law in terms of probable cause and the ability to defeat a stop or a ticketing based on lack of probable cause. And I simply haven't had the time to look at that, follow that through the legal precedent up through the stuff we're looking at. So I understand, I appreciate what you just said, Ms. Watson, but I also want to look at some things legally in terms of what the exact status of the law is. And let me also say, in accord with that, I am always concerned about putting another layer of law on law that already exists and should be efficient and effective in stopping some of the things that we're trying to stop here. And so it just always concerns me to start adding another law. And that doesn't say I'm against it. I just want to take a longer look at this in terms of, and so I'm certainly not trying to stall anything here, but I want enough time to look at this. So.
Can I make another comment?
Sure, please.
The issue that you raised about the noise ordinance and the thing, that isn't an exception in the Ann Arbor, but I think that if we built in some language that referred to the noise ordinance or a methodology of determining where this exceeds, whatever our decibel limit is, then, we could have that in there. And then this isn't related to this specific thing, but the report that we received, or that was attached to this item on the agenda, is a report from an organization that was hired by the city to examine our policing and make recommendations. And among that report is a table of findings and recommendations. I think there's 72 of those in there, which make specific suggestions with regard to the police department and policies that might exist there. And I guess I'd like to see a report that shows what has been changed and how each one of these things has been addressed by the police department, to the extent that they have been at this point in time. And I think that's something that could be very important for us in determining how far we've come anyway. So.
Okay, anything else? Dr. Altman?
I want to make reference to the same report and comment on the veil of darkness analysis that is in that report. And this is an analysis technique that, as I understand it, compares the demographics of traffic stops across two conditions. One condition where there's enough daylight for the officer to identify who they're pulling over, and another where there's not enough daylight for the officer to identify who they're pulling over. So one condition involves an opportunity for an officer to express bias, and the other one doesn't. And if the demographics of those two conditions the demographics of traffic stops across those two conditions don't differ, then there's no evidence of bias. And the veil of darkness analysis in the CNA report shows that the demographics of traffic stops across those two conditions don't differ. So from that analysis, there's no evidence of officers making decisions that express bias. And so I need somebody to tell me why that's the wrong analysis, because it looks to me like it's a pretty sophisticated analysis. I do understand that there's a difference in the demographics of traffic stops and the demographics of city residents. But the demographics of city residents aren't necessarily the same as the demographics of drivers on the road when those stops are happening. And we have a lot of thoroughfares in East Lansing, and people drive from outside the city to get to other places outside the city. So I don't find the demographics of the residents of East Lansing to be a persuasive baseline for that analysis. So I haven't heard this discussed as part of this, but my basic take on this is that if our police are doing their jobs, then we should recognize that. And I recognize that every department in every organization everywhere has room for improvement, but you don't get improvements if you don't recognize when people are doing things right. So that is a question that I have about the overarching approach here. We have some evidence that we seem to not be paying attention to, and that evidence seems to be motivating this approach. And I also do not accept that several things on the list are not safety related. Tinted windows are absolutely safety related. We have all walked in front of a car with confidence because we're able to see the driver seeing us. And if you have a tinted windshield that's tinted to a certain extent, and I don't know exactly where this sits in terms of state law, if you can't see the driver, then you can't see where they're looking. And that's a problem. It interferes with driver-driver communications also. So I absolutely see that as a safety issue, and I see loud exhaust as a public health issue. It's more than just an annoyance. It startles people who have anxiety disorders, it keeps people up at night. It's a public health issue. And I don't want to take a step backwards on that issue, on anything that has to do with public health and safety. There are probably other violations on that list that are in the state code for a reason. it's easy to make fun of the rule against things hanging from your rearview mirror, but if that thing is large enough to block your vision, then it's a problem. If it's jumping around, then it's a visual distraction, and that's a problem. I don't want to remove anything from the State Motor Vehicle Code until I know why it was in there in the first place. Because somebody else thought about that a lot harder than I have, and I don't necessarily want to second guess their decisions. And the last thing I'll say is that there is a benefit to having a uniform code that governs driving, because drivers move around. And we're not doing anybody any favors if they can have tinted windows in East Lansing, but then get pulled over by the MSP as soon as they hit the highway. How is that beneficial to anybody? So there are some specific and some general concerns that I have with this approach, and at the moment I don't see myself supporting going in this direction.
Okay, anything else for tonight?
I have one more.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Just want to say that unfortunately, systemic racism is hard to just pinpoint. And it takes multi-disciplines to talk about this and to think this through. It doesn't take a single report from CNA. Is that the place, CNA? Anyway. It doesn't take a single report from them, and there was pushback on that reference to this veil of darkness. I live in the city of East Lansing. I am a Black woman, and I have been pulled over for pretextual stops. And so it's not just an outside thing, it's a thing that's happening for Black and brown people. And people shouldn't have some different code for driving around our city because of what goes on, including the pretextual stops. But I'm not here to convince one person alone, but I just want to caution you all that you can't just lean into one report when there's tons of other data out there that tells us Black and brown people are being pulled over at higher rates. It becomes dangerous, life-threatening to deadly for us. And we are asking and showing that pretextual stops is possibly just a part of systemic racism, and that's why it's in place. And if we take it off the books, it's not going to harm as you think it might harm, and that is my opinion. But I'm not here to, again, convince one person. I'm here to encourage everyone to use multidisciplinary understandings of things and not just one report that speaks to one veil of darkness, as well as recognizing how systemic racism works. And this is it working, a decision not to take this off the books.
Anything else? Okay. Moving ahead to item 7.4, discussion of Board of Water and Light rate increase for East Lansing residents and a city's payment to BWL for electric service. Mr. Bellarmine.
So, Councilmember Meadows asked what was the impact, or what would the impact be based on Lansing's Board of Water and Lights rate increases. So there was a additional memo put together by Justin Geiger that was added to the online agenda, indicating for electric, we'll see about $416,000 increase over 2 years, about $214,000 in year one, and $201,000 in year two. And then the water side is part of Elmswa, and those increases will, of course, be passed on to residents, and it did not calculate specifically what those would be unless Ron knows.
That's a different system.
Yeah, we don't currently have any residents on Board of Water, Light, Water. That'll impact us if we have to open any of the emergency connections, which we have several with the board, and that does happen from time to time, but until that is the case, that water rate increase shouldn't impact us.
So if I can just
Go ahead, please.
Ask a question, or make a suggestion. So nearly $500,000 of increased cost to the city of East Lansing. But what we don't have, and what presumably Board of Water and Light does have is the impact on our residents. And the analysis that would indicate that based on our current average household usage, what the cost per household might be over this 2-year period. I feel like we should ask the Board of Water and Light for that information, as I think in the letter that was sent by Councilmember Watson and a subsequent letter that was sent by myself and Councilmember Altman, we pointed out that when citizens have tried to get this information from BWL, they've been hit with a pretty substantial bill, $5,000 to get the information from them. I think we should ask for this information as a city based on our residents' usage so that we have that information in hand and the citizens of our community have that information in hand. I think there's still a way for us to at least moderate this rate increase, and I think we should keep plugging along trying to convince Board of Water and Light that there may be a better way to do this.
Would an idea be then to have the city manager compose such a letter for our approval to direct?
That would be great.
To the, what do you call, what's Peffley's name? I can't remember his title.
General manager, I believe.
What is it? General manager. And copied to all of the board including the ex officio members, of which we have one. Does that sound like a proposal we can go ahead with?
That's a great idea, and really, I've kind of wondered why haven't we heard from our person on the board about this? And I think we need to get at least some of maybe the inside information that he was provided with, and that may help our citizens understand why this was necessary, perhaps, or why it was unnecessary in the volume that it is.
Yeah, and my thought is by the vehicle of that letter also directed to the ex officio, then maybe a dialogue can be started between the city manager and our representative with regard to those issues.
That'd be great.
So maybe, Mr. City Manager, if you could compose a letter, then have it before us as early as next week, just for us to approve, maybe by resolution, I would suggest might be the most effective way of doing that. Is that possible for next week?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Anything further on this? Okay, item 7.5, discussion of solar installation on city-owned property.
So we've provided in the agenda packet some additional information about the city's efforts to look at solar, to evaluate not only solar but geothermal on what is the most advantageous of providing that alternate source of energy for our community. So if you recall back on April 9th, then Scott House and Cliff Walls brought to you a request for solar energy generation at the Department of Public Works to hire an assessment of that and look at all options and what would be the most advantageous. And Cliff, do you want to highlight some of the additional items that you presented?
Yeah, so Mr. Bellman and I spoke about just some other things that we've been working on lately related to renewable energy and such. That was the big one, having Tetra Tech do that review. It's still under draft. We're waiting for some final reviews from staff and DPW. But there's some pretty interesting findings out of that. A surprise to me was the cost of geothermal, but it is possible out there. But some of the other things we're working on, and Mr. Altman will remember this from the Commission on the Environment meeting last month. We have a My Healthy Climate Corps member, basically a AmeriCorps member funded primarily by Eagle. We were one of 30 host organizations in the state that were placed with one of these fellows. And Brian Dickens is our AmeriCorps member, and he's performing solar potential assessments of all of our city parcels. That includes anything from park to the woods, like just green space, to some of the like the property up on West and Coleman, and what his last report to the Commission on Environment was somewhat surprising that there's not a lot of good land for us. You're not going to cut down trees for solar necessarily. Brian is very sweet on that West and Coleman property. I think he said something like 9 watts or megawatts potential out there. But yeah, I'm just kind of here to answer any questions you have. I guess I'm not entirely sure what direction you want to take this discussion item, but I'm here to do whatever I can.
If I can. My memory is that, back in maybe 2019 or 2018, we actually gave the thumbs up to using that property in front of DPW, which we were trying to sell at the time, to install solar. So here we are a few years later, and I was hoping to get some information on what the game plan is on that particular piece of property, but also in the interim, we've talked about putting solar on the top of city buildings. We've talked about parking lots and solar, and specifically with regard to solar, during that same time frame where we approved the installation out at DPW. I think we also approved the installation, which got some comment this evening as not quite being constructed in conformance with the plan we approved. That's over off of Bircham. But during that time period, we also had an approval of a property tax, personal property tax reduction to facilitate the installation of solar on the MSU parking lots. And, that might be a private enterprise. It might not be something that DPW does or the city, contracts completely for, but that's a revenue stream. And it is additional energy that's available for MSU that is non-fossil based. So I'm wondering where we are sort of on the whole picture, and this is a very good report, but from the horse's mouth, I'd like to find out what we're really doing here. So.
Yeah, so there's a lot of parts there, but for the specific example of DPW solar, those original conversations predate my time, but my understanding is that roughly 2019 or so, Michigan Energy Options was engaged to conduct a fairly superficial review of what could be possible, basically using PV watts or some other sort of similar software to see like what kind of size unit can we put in there. How many arrays can we fit in that parcel? And that was done, and then there was a plan for a phase 2. I remember hearing about that when I first started in late 21, middle of December 21, this phase 2 component. But that same, in 2022, the IRA provisions allowing a tax-exempt entity to get direct pay. Basically, historically, the federal incentive for solar has come through tax credits. We don't pay taxes. The IRA provision changed that so there was a 30% direct pay available to tax-exempt agencies. That's why we saw a gold rush for solar at the churches in town, because all of a sudden they had a 30% coupon that they otherwise weren't available to them. But the other component to that is that in order to previously access solar tax credits, as a municipality, you had to have a PPA, a power purchasing agreement. That's what MEO, Michigan Energy Options, served at the Bircham community solar park. So we own the land as the city, but they own and operate that facility. They do some things like pay DPW, park staff. They cover their time to mow it once in a while and stuff like that. But it's ultimately a third party is realizing those benefits and then passing a little bit of the benefit on to the owner. In that case, it's a community solar park. It's different than if we had to go out and take a smaller cut of those solar credits or the solar benefit by giving some of that up to an entity that's trying to make money.
But I'll just note that citizens in the community bought a piece of that.
Yes.
And I get a benefit
Yes.
every month, so.
Yes, what I'm trying to communicate is that the landscape has significantly changed in the last few years, in the last 2.5 years. At the same time, actually, like within months of the IRA provision, the Board of Water and Light also changed their rules. They got rid of net metering, and now they have a distributed generation system. And so all that together, the landscape had changed underneath us in terms of what we could do. We no longer needed to go through a PPA. At the same time, we could potentially operate and own a facility ourselves. And the rules changed with the local landscape. Also, the previous review that was done by MEO was pretty, like I said, like not in a negative way, but it's superficial. Like, hey, it was like a more higher level planning thing. But it couldn't tell us, do we need to upgrade the switch gears in the electrical room? Do we need to upgrade the transformer at the street? Does the local grid have the capacity to transmit anything that we generate out there? So that was kind of the holdup, is understanding what we could feasibly do with the, within the context of the infrastructure on site in terms of the electrical capacity of the building and the transmission capacity of the grid. That's where Tetra Tech comes in. So as far as like what the city, what the intended or hopeful steps were in 2019, like I'm sure this has taken a little bit longer, but based on what I understood about the position of the city at that time, or like the position of the information available to the city at that time, that wasn't probably a realistic timeline. As far as this project, I have some comments that I'm shipping back to them, trying to understand like if we can go bigger with the existing transformer, excluding geothermal. But I think this is a good place to have that conversation. Like, what's the appetite of council? Because this wasn't really budgeted for, and we didn't have a number to budget for during budget development. So how does this fit into, our capital planning and beyond? But we'll have those figures and kind of know what we're up against for the next budget season, unless there's an avenue in between here and then.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
So I wasn't clear from the packet, sort of what's the ask here? Are you asking us for direction? Are you making a proposal like that's on the table that we?
I don't think we're in a position to ask for direction. I think there's some additional quantification needed so that we can provide you options and costs and what that return is, and some of the mechanisms that Cliff indicated that need to be put in place to make sure that we could take advantage of whatever the investment we make at DPW or other places. I know that the ask of Senator Peters when we were doing that congressional directed funding for that project at Hannah included solar on the top of Hannah, but that did not receive funding at the congressional level. So again, it's expensive, but we need to look at what are the options and what makes most sense, what's the most cost-effective way, and what is that return back to the city.
So my impression of the report, so the geothermal is 57-year payback or whatever it is. That sort of sounds unrealistic. But the solar is 5 to 7 years is what I'm seeing, or 8 years payback. So that sounds pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I also see that you've got bids, right, from 4 different offers for that project. What I didn't see in there was the actual Tetra Tech analysis of the solar. I saw the Tetra Tech analysis of the geothermal, but I didn't see the report for the analysis on the solar. Maybe I just missed it. But is the bottom line that their analysis is that it's feasible out there?
Oh, certainly, yeah.
So it's feasible, and we have bids.
Yeah.
So is there a reason not to move on this sooner rather than later?
No. I think the only thing that I want to make sure is that we're going as big as we feasibly can, and that's one of the things, like we got this back last month, or like late July or something. It was after the storm, and so I would admit that I'm a little behind on diving deep into this in particular, but I think their recommendation was a 200 kilowatt system, and that if the city did decide to do geothermal, then it would be required to upgrade the transformer. The transformer is 100 grand, let's say 120 grand, and there's a 12-month wait list, or just a back order supply chain issue. But I'm really curious, and I want to hear from them, and that's part of my comments on my end, is how big can we go with our existing transformer that's out there, versus putting $100,000 into a new transformer. Just what's the max number of array, or max size kilowatt system that could be transmitted with that transformer that already exists?
Well, so I, for one, would be interested in moving ahead on this. I think we have enough information to know that we have a reasonable payback period, and it seems worthwhile to get some experience with these systems and get one in. And unless there's benefits to waiting until we can wrap it all up into other projects and on other buildings, then and maybe that's a reason to wait. But if we have bids and we have the 30% coupon, my inclination is to move.
Yeah.
Ditto. Mr. Bellman?
I'll get with staff and I'll bring a recommendation back. Again, 5 to 7, what happens after that and what's available to replace if the shelf life is 5 years.
Fair enough?
Thank you, yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
anything?
One last thing. Because MSU actually had an outside contractor put that in, and essentially what they are doing is using the power, but also they're getting some revenue with regard to that. And I'm not averse to that. So if we haven't contacted somebody like that contractor, I think we should have a conversation with them. We can lease the air rights over our parking lots, and any revenue that we can get is good revenue as far as I'm concerned. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, anything else? Okay.
Only thing I'll add, just real quick, is one reason that we wanted to make sure we're going big is because we're expecting the transition to EVs. Yep. We want to make sure that we're able to support that.
Anything else now? Okay, I think we are now in order to have a motion to take us into closed session for collective bargaining reasons.
I move that we go into closed session pursuant to MCL 15.268 sub 1 sub C to discuss strategy connected with the negotiation of a collective bargaining agreement.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Altman, seconded by Meadows. Any discussion? Please give us a roll call vote.
Councilmember Altman?
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows?
Yes.
Councilmember Watson?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Singh?
Yes.
Mayor Brookover?
Yes. Okay, we'll adjourn for the purpose of this closed session and then return.
open session.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Altman, seconded by Meadows. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you, folks, for being here tonight.